Welcome to See Crime Stories, true stories of the missing and the pursuit of answers. 5 seconds is all it takes to frame what follows. A school day ends, a teenager leaves early, and a family waits for a call that never comes. May 17, 2001, Phoenix. A junior's last day ends before lunch. 17-year-old Alyssa Turney is picked up. A note later says California, and her phone never leaves the house. No ticket, no CCTV trail, no goodbye. For years it reads like a runaway. Then a search flips the case, from missing to something darker, but not to a recovered body, nor a proven crime scene. This is the disappearance of Alyssa Turney. For investigators, the opening hour is about anchors, not theories. The first anchor is time, late morning to midday at Paradise Valley High School, when Alyssa signs out and is seen leaving. The second anchor is location, a residence in Phoenix where a handwritten note surfaces, stating an intention to head to California. The third anchor is what's absent. No airline or bus confirmation ties to an immediate westbound trip. No friend reports a planned ride. No camera chain develops beyond the school day. The device most teenagers would carry forward, the phone, stays behind. The early classification reflects those anchors: missing person, likely runaway. In 2001, that posture influences what is and isn't done. The home is not processed as a homicide scene. There is no 911 call reporting violence, no obvious blood patterning, no emergency response that would preserve a scene as evidence of a violent crime. The initial tasks remain basic: confirm last seen witnesses, gather the note, and document the belongings left at the house. It is clinical work, and it leaves more questions than answers. Friends describe an ordinary end of year. Teachers recall nothing out of pattern. There is no record that Alyssa withdrew cash for a long trip, and no paper trail, ticket stubs, checked bags, verifiable rideshare that would map a route to California. A note can suggest a decision. It doesn't prove a departure. In quiet cases like this, the absence of friction is its own data point: no confrontation logged at school, no neighbors reporting a door slam, nothing to trigger an immediate emergency response. Sometimes the data aligns too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem. From a case-building perspective, Chapter 1 yields one forensic angle worth flagging for later: negative indicators of travel. They don't convict, they narrow. With a phone in the house, with no travel purchase verified, investigators will later return to these gaps and ask whether runaway truly fits the pattern. For now, the file reflects a teenager who left school early and did not come home for dinner. That is the single through line the case cannot escape. This series will follow the evidence in sequence: what was documented, what was missed, and what was found years later when the file reopened. You'll hear measured speculation only where investigators had to choose a path, and always with the status of the case in view: no body recovered, no confirmed homicide scene, and a disappearance that still needs answers. The file moves next to the paper left on the kitchen counter. A handwritten note says California. In 2001, that can steer a missing person case toward the runaway lane and slow everything that would normally happen in a suspected abduction. The job here is simple: test the note against data. If it holds, you'll see money, movement, and messages. If it doesn't, you'll see silence. Investigators start with travel. Airlines and intercity buses keep manifests and reservation records that can be subpoenaed. No reservation pops with the victim's legal name. No ticket is matched to a known alias. Luggage purchases don't surface on bank statements. There isn't a same-day or next-day itinerary linked to her. A teen leaving for another state would usually leave a payment trail, card, cash withdrawal, even a friend's purchase. None of that clears. That doesn't prove a crime. It proves the note didn't come with proof. Ground movement is next. License plate readers were sparse in Phoenix in 2001, and neighborhood cameras weren't common. But investigators still mapped the practical exits to Interstate 10 and the likely stops a teenager would make for a westbound ride. There is no eyewitness who reliably places her at a station counter, a curbside pickup, or in a rideshare. Those services weren't operating then. The school day gives a last reliable timeline anchor, nothing after it builds a chain to California. Phones matter, even before smartphones. The most relevant fact is not a ping pattern, it's possession. The phone stays in the house. A true runaway often keeps the one device that lets them coordinate shelter and money. This one is left behind. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Financials follow. A review of the victim's accounts shows no cash pull consistent with travel. No one sees a new debit card, a prepaid phone card, or a bus voucher in the trash. Friends don't report a plan to crash on a couch in Los Angeles or San Diego. Teachers don't recall a countdown to a move. People do change their lives overnight. They rarely hide the logistics from everyone they know. The early classification, missing, likely runaway, has a second-order effect. The residence is not sealed as a homicide scene. No forensic team takes it apart for blood reagents or fiber collection on day one because there is no 911 call for violence, no visible injury, no report of a struggle. That is not a mistake unique to this case. It's a common consequence when a note suggests a voluntary exit. It would matter years later when investigators try to reconstruct a day that was never processed like a crime. When the file is reopened, the note is retested for authorship and context. The language is brief and generic. There is no specific destination, no named contact, no address, no time of departure, no return plan. It reads like a label, not a route. Analysts compare the handwriting to known samples, checking for letter formation, pressure, and line rhythm, but a note can be authentic in appearance and still be misleading in message. The only standard that matters is whether the content maps to external facts. Here, it doesn't. People watching cases like this often ask about California sightings. Tips do arrive across the years. Each one is weighed for proximity to the last confirmed timeline, for independent corroboration, and for the likelihood of mistaken identity. None converts into a verified contact, no bank use, no work record, no school enrollment, no DMV activity. In towns across America, families carry hope through these tip cycles. It's human to hope. It's the investigator's job to separate hope from proof without taking dignity from either. A second look at the school window clarifies one more thing. Leaving early is not, by itself, evidence of a plan to vanish. Students leave early on the last day all the time. The absence of a goodbye is not proof of harm, but it is a deviation from how teenagers generally move. That deviation, phone left, no cash, no ticket, is the first real forensic discovery of this case, a declared destination with no measurable travel. It tightens the frame on what likely happened after the school pickup without naming a suspect or inventing a scene that wasn't processed. You can build drama out of speculation, but it collapses under scrutiny. The better path is to set clean rules now. This series will not claim a recovered body, a recovered weapon, or a proven homicide scene, because none exists in the public record. We will move only as far as the record moves. We will keep humanity in view, a teenager who did not walk back through the door, and a community that still lives with the question. Victimology isn't character study, it's pattern analysis. To understand a disappearance, investigators rebuild the ordinary day and look for the first abnormal minute. With Alyssa Turney, that work starts at Paradise Valley High School and expands to the tight circle of places and people that shaped her week, classes, part-time work possibilities, after-school contacts, and the home schedule anchored to May 2001. Attendance logs confirm her spring standing as a junior. Teachers note a typical end-of-year cadence, finals wrapped, classrooms clearing, students signing out early with parental pickup. Hall passes and sign-out books give a clock and a direction, out of the building before lunch. That matters because routine is predictive. When teenagers deviate, it usually comes with a purpose they share with someone. Here, peers don't report a planned shift, trip, or goodbye gathering tied to that last day. Guidance records and yearbook notes reflect the usual talk, summer plans in Phoenix, not an out-of-state move. In cases like this, investigators flag silent deviation as a risk indicator, a change in schedule with no parallel chatter. The next circle is social. Detectives run a straightforward drill, identify friends she saw the week prior, confirm any friction, verify who expected to see her the evening of May 17th. Classmates describe a normal mood. A boyfriend and close friends recall conversations typical of May, grades, summer jobs, family rules. Nothing in those interviews sketches a concrete California destination or a ride waiting after school. It's not that teenagers always telegraph big choices, it's that sustained silence across an entire friend group is uncommon when a move is real. The case file codes that silence as a factor, not proof of harm, but a departure from how teens generally arrange a major change. Home routine is mapped next. Investigators list when dinner is usually served, who's home by late afternoon, and what chores or obligations tie a 17-year-old to the house on a Thursday. A consistent evening pattern makes absence easier to see. It also creates a predictable window for someone intent on blocking or exploiting that pattern. The file notes the house is the last known repository of her personal items and that the day contained no emergency call for a violent event. From a victimology view, those facts don't end the inquiry, they frame the questions for later evidence. If a teen leaves early, how soon would she surface at a friend's, at work, or on a phone line? When she doesn't, why? Investigators also audit the near-future calendar. If a teenager is truly restarting life in another state, traces appear in the week before departure, a manager asked for time off, a locker emptied of keepsakes, a teacher handed a forwarding contact, a neighbor told to watch for a package. None of those markers resolves to a verified California plan. The absence of routine closure, no goodbyes, no wrap-ups, keeps the disappearance in an unplanned or constrained bucket. You can feel the human edge of that conclusion without dramatics. People don't just walk away from every touchpoint in their life with all threads cut cleanly at once. A closer look at school edges gives one more lead. The corridor outside her shop in core classes sees steady traffic. End-of-year days often mean students drifting without a bell schedule. Security coverage in 2001 is limited. Even so, investigators try to establish the last reliable eyes, who saw her in the building, who saw her exit, who saw which vehicle. Accounts converge only on the early pickup. No witness produces a post-school hangout, no coach or club advisor logs a late meeting, and custodial staff can't place her back on campus after noon. That leaves investigators with a narrow corridor of time, late morning to early afternoon, and no confirmed re-entry into any public setting after that. Victimology also asks about vulnerability and resilience. Was she the kind of teen who would announce a break or test independence quietly? Friends and teachers describe a normal range, assertive in some settings, private in others, but nothing that points to a rehearsed escape. The balance of evidence fits a teenager embedded in a Phoenix routine, not actively gathering resources to live elsewhere. In practical terms, that keeps the working theory focused on whatever happened in the short window after school, not on a long-planned westbound move. There's a human piece to doing this right. When law enforcement walks a family through victimology, it can sound cold: calendars, habits, deviations. But the point is dignity, building the person back from records so assumptions don't drive the search. In American towns, missing cases test a community's patience and care. People want certainty. The honest answer at this stage is narrower: a defined routine, a sudden break, and no confirmed reappearance. The forensic discovery for this chapter is limited but decisive: a stable personal schedule with no credible pre-planning for interstate relocation. That discovery sets the next move. If the weeks before May 17th show no realistic path to California, then the weight of the inquiry shifts to the hours after the pickup, phone access, transport control, and inside-the-home opportunity. We will take those pieces in order, without assuming a scene that was never established. The case now narrows to the short span after the school sign-out. That window is small enough to measure in minutes and practical enough to test with two questions: who controlled transportation and who controlled the phone. If you answer those cleanly, the rest of the day stops being guesswork. Transportation first. Leaving a Phoenix high school before lunch in 2001 is not unusual. Getting from campus to anywhere meaningful still requires a driver, a bus, or a long walk. Detectives reconstruct the likely paths: student lots, parent pickup lanes, the streets that feed out of Paradise Valley High. They look for a second ride, friend, boyfriend, neighbor, and they work the names through interviews. No one presents a reliable post-campus pickup. That leaves the initial pickup as the only verified movement of the day. When a disappearance hinges on a short window, the person who controls that ride has positional leverage, time, route, and destination, whether they use it for anything more than a trip home or not. The route home is straightforward. There is no credible sighting of the teen at a bus station, airport, or mall after the pickup. There is no validated transfer to a different vehicle. Phoenix in 2001 does not give you modern camera grids or easy plate reader archives, so you are left with ordinary corroboration, neighbors, store clerks, and anyone who would have noticed a second stop. Nothing cleanly extends the chain of travel. In practical terms, the school-to-home ride is the last defensible movement in the file. Now the phone. The detail that mattered in earlier chapters matters even more here. The phone stays in the residence. That tells you two things at once. First, if the teenager intended to coordinate an immediate move or meet anyone after school, leaving the device behind undercuts the plan. Second, any phone use recorded that afternoon, missed rings, messages left on a landline, check-ins with friends, would have to be initiated by others, not by her. Investigators compile those attempts and note the gaps. When you lay the grid over the afternoon, you see attempts to reach her and you see no outgoing pattern from her side. You do not see a handoff to a different device or a prepaid card bought for travel. In 2001, that kind of handoff would still leave footprints, receipts, wrappers, someone who sold it. Nothing surfaces that holds up. Inside the home, the opportunity is about privacy and timing. A teenager who arrived before lunch would usually be seen again by late afternoon, kitchen, living room, a call to confirm evening plans. When that does not happen, you look at who else had access to the space in that span and whether there was any necessity for a second ride. The file does not claim a struggle or a 911 call. It does not claim a processed homicide scene. It asks a smaller, sharper question: was there any plausible point in those hours when the teenager could have left on her own and built even a minimal trail? The answer, based on available records, is no. Investigators also check external pulls on routine. Was there an appointment, a shift at work, a practice, or a friend's home expecting her? If yes, a no-show timestamps the problem. If no, the afternoon is unstructured, and unstructured time is where cases like this lose clarity. The file, as summarized publicly, shows no binding obligation that afternoon and no confirmed reappearance anywhere else. That combination, an early arrival home, no outgoing phone use, and no subsequent confirmed location, keeps the focus on who controlled mobility during the small window and whether anyone else could have inserted a second ride without leaving witnesses. One more element matters for sequencing: the absence of a same-day search or emergency response. In runaway-leaning classifications, no officers are dispatched to lock down the house, and no canvass is launched in the first critical hours. That is not unique to Phoenix in 2001, it is a structural reality of how missing person triage worked then. The consequence is evidentiary, not rhetorical. If something significant happened in that early afternoon corridor, the delay in treating the space as a potential scene means there is no contemporaneous forensic suite to test it. You cannot invent one later. You can only admit what the record lacks and continue to press the timeline. From a human lens, this is the part families replay for years, the simple, domestic hours when someone should have been visible again and wasn't. In American neighborhoods, those hours are the soft spots: no cameras, no clerks, just a kitchen and a clock. The work for us is not to dramatize that gap but to keep it honest. One verified ride, no second ride confirmed, phone left in the house, no documented reappearance. The forensic discovery for this section is precise: transport control without documented transfer and phone opportunity without outgoing use. It is not proof of harm. It is the reason later investigators will test statements about who was present, who left, and who had the means to limit movement in those hours. Next, the record shifts from movement and devices to what the long quiet did to the file. How years later, A search warrant would change the shape of the case on paper while leaving the most important fact exactly where it started: no recovered body. Cold cases don't pause, they calcify. Files get heavier, and the useful parts get harder to see. After the early afternoon window closed with no second ride and no outgoing phone use, the investigation into Alyssa Turney's disappearance moved into years defined by tips, rumors, and one high-profile claim that promised resolution but delivered noise. The first stretch is familiar to any missing person unit in the early 2000s: flyers, periodic canvases, and scattered California sightings that arrive by phone or letter. Each tip is processed the same way: timeline, proximity, independent corroboration, and whether the person named actually exists and can be located. The majority fall apart on contact. A waitress thinks she remembers a face. A neighbor swears a girl from Phoenix rented a room. When investigators request records, employment forms, DMV checks, school enrollment, there is no paper trail that ties back to the 17-year-old who left school before lunch on May 17, 2001. Hope is allowed. Proof is required. Years in, a convicted killer housed in another state claims responsibility for Alyssa's death. It makes headlines, because confessions from inside prison often do. The claim is parsed the same way every serious bureau teaches it. Can the claimant place the victim with specificity, time, date, location, without repeating details already public? Can he provide non-public knowledge that investigators can verify? Does his own movement log, custody status, or known associates make the story even possible? On all three questions, the confession fails. His timeline conflicts with established records. The details he offers mirror what had circulated in media, not what sat in the confidential sections of the file. The where never becomes a place detectives can dig, search, or image. It is eliminated and recorded as such, but the damaged public side is predictable. Families hear confession, not failure to corroborate. The case file reflects a quiet that is not truly quiet. Detectives keep clipping reports into a matrix: date of tip, origin, claim, test applied, and result. It reads like a negative of a photograph. What you see are the spaces where proof should be and isn't. No bank account activity from the missing teen appears under Social Security traces. No verifiable work record under her legal name or a credible alias. No verified medical visit or prescription in another state. That constellation of absence becomes its own evidentiary shape. It doesn't supply a suspect, it removes entire categories of explanation that depend on a sustained, independent life after May 2001. The long quiet also exposes structural limits. In 2001 Phoenix, there was no habit of blanket surveillance outside a few high-value corridors. Residential cameras were rare. License plate readers, as a systematic net, were not yet the reality they would become a decade later. When families ask why there isn't a pull-down clip to watch, the answer is technical, not evasive. The infrastructure didn't exist, and a runaway classification rarely triggered extraordinary collection efforts. The consequence is that a crucial question, what, if anything, happened inside the residence that afternoon, was never tested with contemporaneous forensic processing. That isn't a late twist, it is a condition of the case that never changes. You can feel the human friction in that fact. Families are asked to accept that the absence of a body and the absence of a crime scene can coexist with durable suspicion. Communities are asked to carry a story that is missing its central proof. For narrative purposes, the temptation is to fill the gap with speculation. For investigative purposes, the discipline is to hold the line. The only safe claims are the ones the record can carry. A teenager left school early, left her phone at home, was not confirmed anywhere public afterward, and did not surface in the official systems that catch almost everyone who resettles: taxes, licenses, wages, medical care. The false confession deserves one more line because it shapes expectations. When an incarcerated offender points to a victim without producing a location, an object, or knowledge only the perpetrator would know, investigators treat it as a bid for attention or leverage. The process of disproving it consumes time, pulling movement logs, comparing case facts, and briefing prosecutors in case the claim finds a microphone. The value, if there is any, comes from what the debunking leaves behind, a cleaner perimeter. With the prison claim eliminated and the California sightings unverified, the working map tightens back to Phoenix, to the early hours after school, and to the people who had lawful or practical access to the teen in that window. There is room here for one human sentence that matters. In towns and cities across America, families listen to these negative findings and try to translate them into hope or grief. The responsible answer is neither. It is patience tied to precision. A disappearance can break apart a life without giving you the peace you most need. The work is to keep the file honest until a real peace arrives. The forensic discovery for this section is specific, a lead elimination matrix that formally removes an external confessor and a stack of interstate tips that never meet the corroboration threshold. That discovery is not theatrical, but it is progress. It prevents the investigation from drifting toward a suspect who cannot be placed in time or space with the victim, and it returns the file to the only corridor that ever held, Phoenix, May 17, 2001, early afternoon. Next, the quiet ends on paper. Years later, a search warrant and a house full of contraband move the case out of rumor and into a courtroom pathway. It does not yield a recovered body. It does not convert the residence into a proven homicide scene. It does change how prosecutors think about what can be charged when a disappearance won't resolve itself. Years passed without a body, a weapon, or a verified sighting. Then detectives pursued a search warrant for the Phoenix residence tied to Alyssa Turney's last known day. What followed did not produce remains or a homicide scene. It produced something else, a house full of contraband and documents that pushed the case down two separate tracks, one federal, one still a disappearance. The entry was methodical. Rooms were cleared, closets opened, containers logged. Investigators documented and seized firearms in volume, improvised explosive devices, and 2 silencers. They also collected writings that focused rage on a labor union, material that would later anchor a federal prosecution unrelated to Alyssa's status. From a true crime audience view, this moment often gets misread as the break. It wasn't. Nothing seized that day located the missing teenager or converted the home into a proven homicide scene. What it did was change who went to court, for what, and when. On paper, the case divided. One path moved to federal court on weapons and explosive counts, the other remained the open file on a 17-year-old who left school before lunch on May 17, 2001 and never reappeared in any official system. Prosecutors at the federal level didn't have to prove anything about the disappearance to secure a conviction on the contraband. They had to prove possession and intent connected to the devices and the writings. That's a different burden, a different narrative, and it moved quickly to its own result, a 10-year federal sentence and, years later, a release from custody. None of that changed the absence at the center of the other file. Inside the missing person investigation, the warrant return still mattered. Detectives reviewed the inventory for any object that could bridge to Alyssa, personal effects indicating recent contact, media storage containing undisclosed communications, or records tying her to a specific place and time after the school pickup. Those links didn't materialize in a way that could be presented as direct proof. The house yielded volume, it did not yield the piece that cold case work needs most, a location or a non-public fact that leads to one. This is where procedure protects the story from speculation. A seizure of weapons can shape perceptions, but it is not itself a homicide scene. Forensic teams can only test what exists. In this file, there was no recovered body to examine, no known dump site to search, no blood patterning contemporaneously preserved from 2001 to interpret years later. The warrant made the dossier heavier and raised prosecutorial options. It did not certify what happened to the teenager after the early afternoon window we mapped in the last section. There is a reasonable human reaction to a discovery like this. If a home contains explosives and manifestos, people assume the worst about everything else. The discipline here is to separate charges. Federal weapons counts don't answer the Phoenix question. They can influence how a grand jury views circumstantial context down the line. They cannot replace the missing cornerstone, proof that a homicide occurred, where it occurred, and how. That remains the line investigators have to respect in law and in storytelling. Still, the search changed the temperature of the room. Advocacy around the case grew. Media interest sharpened. When a cold file intersects with a live criminal prosecution, any prosecution, attention spikes. Families who have waited for years see movement, and the public tends to merge separate lanes into one narrative. Our job is to keep the lanes clean. As of the end of that warrant cycle, the facts you can safely state are narrow and important. Contraband was seized, federal charges were pursued and won, and none of it produced Alyssa or a confirmed homicide scene. From a community lens, that's an unsatisfying answer, but it's an honest one. Across American cities, some searches change everything, others change the paperwork and little else. You honor the difference so the audience understands what the record can actually bear. The warrant changed attention, not answers. What came next was a different kind of pressure, organized, public, and relentless. Families in cold files sometimes go quiet. This one did the opposite. Advocacy moved the disappearance of Alyssa Turney from a paper file to a front-facing campaign, dedicated tip lines, records requests, interviews, and long-form coverage that reintroduced the timeline to a national audience. When a case lacks a body and a processed homicide scene, the most effective tool left is disciplined daylight. That's what happened here. The strategy was simple: put verified facts where people could see them, keep speculation out, and invite anyone with first-hand knowledge from 2001 to speak. Media segments summarized the anchors we've already laid down: early school sign out, no corroborated California travel, phone left at home, and then asked the one question that still mattered: who had access and control in the short window after pickup? Podcasts and long-form digital pieces slowed the story down to its working parts. They didn't create new evidence, they made the absence visible and memorable, which is often how dormant witnesses finally surface. Advocacy also pushed process. Public records requests clarified what was done and what wasn't in the early years. That transparency matters in a cold case, because it tells investigators where a second look might actually pay off. If a neighborhood canvas was narrow, expand it. If a set of employment or medical checks didn't include a certain database, run it now with modern tools. Multiple agencies took fresh statements, compared earlier interviews for contradictions, and retested assumptions that had become habits. The point here isn't drama. It's hygiene, cleaning a case until only the durable parts remain. As attention ramped up, the file began to move in the one venue that can act without a recovered body: a grand jury. Prosecutors built a circumstantial theory from routine evidence, post-event behavior, and statements under oath. The legal question wasn't whether a body had been found or a murder scene proven; it hadn't. The question was whether the totality met the probable cause threshold to charge. That is a lower standard than proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but it is not symbolic. It requires coherence, a timeline that holds, access that can be shown, and explanations that fail against the record. Behind the scenes, investigators prepared in the only way that works for a no-body case: eliminate alternate routes out of Phoenix, formalize the early afternoon window, and catalog post-2001 conduct that the fact-finder could interpret. None of that created a location for remains. None of it converted the 2008 search into a homicide scene. It did something more procedural and just as real: it organized the evidence so a panel of citizens could evaluate it together instead of in fragments. The human side stayed present without turning into theater. Public appeals reminded people that a 17-year-old did not reappear in any of the systems that catch ordinary life: work, healthcare, licensing, taxes. That absence is not a story beat, it's a civic fact. In American communities, advocacy like this has a purpose beyond one case. It teaches families how to document timelines, how to ask for records, and how to press while staying inside the lines of law and respect. The message is simple and useful: precision helps, noise hurts. By late 2010s, momentum was measurable. The same anchors that closed our earlier chapters: no verified interstate travel, no post-school sightings, phone left at home, and a tight transport window, were no longer just narrative, they were exhibits. That movement culminated years later in a charging decision, which we will reach in sequence. For now, the record supports only this: advocacy amplified the facts guided the legal strategy, and the legal system engaged without the one proof every family hopes for. The file moved when prosecutors organized what already existed. A grand jury was convened years after the disappearance, not to solve what couldn't be solved, but to decide whether the total picture met probable cause to charge. Inside that room there were no new miracles, no recovered body, no homicide scene, no weapon. There was a structured sequence: the last day pickup from school, no verified interstate travel, the phone left at the residence, and a narrow early afternoon window with no confirmed second ride or public reappearance. Alternate explanations that had failed against records were formally set aside. On that record, in 2020, jurors returned a true bill for second-degree murder. Indictment authorized prosecution. It did not answer the missing piece. Standard steps followed: arrest, booking, counsel, pretrial conditions. The case then took the only path a nobody file can take, into open court where the same anchors had to carry a heavier legal burden. The state presented a circumstantial timeline. The defense pressed the gap at the center: no remains, no scene, no direct forensic sample to establish where or how a death occurred. In 2023, after trial, the verdict was not guilty. That single outcome controls the narrative. There isn't a second ending. The legal result didn't change the facts that families and communities live with. As of October 31, 2025, Alyssa Turney remains missing. Phoenix is still the last confirmed setting. The home never became a proven homicide scene. The 2008 search yielded weapons and writings that supported a separate federal prosecution years earlier. It did not locate the teenager or convert the disappearance into a scene-based case. Those distinctions matter. They keep this story honest and prevent exactly the kind of confusion viewers have flagged in other videos: claims of blood or a body where none was found, or multiple endings that don't belong to the same file. There is a human point worth saying once, clearly. In American nobody cases, precision is respect. Families deserve clarity about what the record shows and what it cannot show. The public deserves a timeline that doesn't drift. For creators and audiences, the discipline is the same: elevate verified anchors, cut noise, and leave room for information that may yet surface. Advocacy helped here, by organizing records, encouraging first-hand witnesses to speak, and keeping attention steady without inventing facts. That is how cold files avoid becoming folklore. If you were with us from the last bell at Paradise Valley High to the grand jury, the lesson is practical. Timelines, devices, and access control can move a case even when the obvious evidence is absent. But courtrooms are not message boards. Probable cause can justify a charge, only proof beyond a reasonable doubt can convict. This case met the first threshold and not the second. Accepting that tension is part of telling true crime responsibly. We close where the record closes. A teenager left school early on May 17, 2001, and never reappeared in any system that tracks ordinary life. A man was charged in 2020 and acquitted in 2023. There is no recovered body, no confirmed homicide scene, and no second ending. If you have first-hand knowledge from Phoenix in May 2001, contact law enforcement. Credible tips have names, dates, and a way to be checked. Precision helps, speculation harms. I've learned that precision is respect: timelines, devices, and facts, not rumors, keep a missing person from fading. Alyssa's case reminds me to check on our kids, document what matters, and speak up early when something feels off. If you lived in Phoenix in May 2001 and recall anything, report it. What detail hit you hardest? Can a nobody case still reach justice? If this story moved you, comment and tell me where you're watching from, and if it didn't, tell me why. If this helped, please subscribe to follow the next cases and keep these stories alive.